Hey guys, how are we doing? Hope we are all doing well. It's fantastic to have you guys here this morning. Good to see so many people in the chat. It's just fantastic to be a part of a community, even if we are all online. Just as Hannah was saying, we're going to continue our series this week. This is the second week of Keep It Real. We're going to be talking about some mental health issues that some people have dealt with over the next few weeks and sort of how they've overcome them, how you can overcome them. And this week I'm going to be talking about my journey with depression, what that looked like for me, and what you can do if you find yourself in similar situations. So first off, I think when talking about topics like depression, stuff as significant and deep as this, it's important to know exactly what it is you're talking about. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to head onto the NHS website to talk about the facts of what the definition of depression actually is. Now, the NHS define depression as a deep sadness and a loss or lack of interest or drive. You know, this idea that this sorrow that we feel, the sorrow that I have felt, can affect your drive and affect your momentum when actually doing things. There are lots of different types of depression, each varying in their severity, and depending on who you are, depression can affect you in different ways. It's to do with personality types, to do with experiences. But one thing to keep abundantly in mind when you're talking about a topic as deep as this one is that no matter where someone is in their journey, whether they are severely feeling depression or whether they're just having maybe some bad days or they don't know what they're doing, we can't belittle people's situations. We need to stay strong in the fact that people might need our help regardless of where they're at. And so if someone comes to you, or indeed you're feeling something, don't feel pushed back depending on where you're at, or don't feel like someone's situation isn't sort of deep enough to regard. But really we want to open up the conversation to anyone, wherever they're at, so that we can sort of push through these things together. So I want to talk a little bit about my journey with depression, kind of all the way up through primary school. I was pretty good. I had a pretty decent life all the way up through that point. I was kind of top of my class all the time in primary school. I was doing very, very well. Never really had any issues. So when I moved into secondary school, the difficulty spike of secondary school hit me pretty hard. I didn't necessarily do badly. I still was in top sets and still did fairly decently in my subjects, but I went from being top of my class to kind of somewhere pretty average to bottom. And in that moment, it kind of accentuated to me that I didn't actually really know what it was that I wanted to do with my life. It was in those moments where I wasn't applying myself because I didn't really care that much about the things that I was doing, and that affected me very, very deeply. I found myself going into school daily to study subjects that I didn't care for, and to add insult to injury, teachers didn't recognise that I wasn't in a good place, and so they pushed me in a way that didn't help me but rather hindered my progress. It made me feel worse about myself, it made me feel worse about my future, and it left me in a state where I really didn't have any clue about what was going on in my life. And so, just as the NHS described, my drive, my interest faded very, very quickly. I found myself doing a grind for something that, it just didn't really feel relevant to me. Didn't really feel applicable to my life. And so I was very depressed. I was in a very poor state to the point of wanting to take my own life at times. Simply because I didn't know what my future held. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't really care to know where I was going. It's difficult when you find yourself in this situation where you have a lack of drive, and that's causing your depression, because that is something that is called self-perpetuating. It doesn't help its own situation. You have a lack of drive, which makes you depressed, which then gives you a lack of drive, which then makes you depressed. And you end up spiraling down this waterfall that you just cannot get up on. So the one thing for me that was really bad about my situation is that I didn't really want to bother anyone with what I was going through. I didn't really want anyone else to experience the feelings that I was feeling. And so I decided that it was better for me to just stick it out, to just face it on my own, to try and understand these things, to try and almost fix these things by myself. And so I didn't rely on anyone else, and more importantly, didn't rely on God to help me out of the situation I was in. Talking about God in this situation, it's very, very, very easy to see God as someone that doesn't necessarily understand what we're feeling. You know, we believe God is perfect. He created everything. He's all powerful. He's above everything. And so how could he understand the emotions that I'm feeling in my heart? Well, the incredible thing is that we read in the Bible several examples of how God feels the way that we feel, the emotions that we've been given. God actually understands it. And so one story that I want to point to in the Bible is actually about Jesus. And, you see a lot of Jesus' life. He's doing great things. He's speaking to huge crowds. He's traveling. He's doing all these things, and it sounds amazing. But things start to change a little bit when you get to the end of his story. So we're going to read from Matthew. This is Matthew 26, verse 36 to 39. And this is just before the betrayal of Jesus. Just before Judas comes up to Jesus with all of these priests and all of these essentially police of the time to come and arrest him and take him to the cross. And this says from verse 36, "Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, 'Sit here while I go and pray over there.' He took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. He said to them, 'My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me.' He went a little further, and he fell on his face and prayed, saying, 'Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will.'" You see, the incredible thing about this story is Jesus understood everything that was going on. He knew why the things that were happening. He knew that his death was going to be the reconciliation for all of us. He knew the significance of this moment. But even in that moment, the sorrow got to him. The depression fell on him. It's incredible that we find Jesus is in the same situation that we find ourselves in so often. And obviously you can understand why he felt sorrowful, because he was about to be killed in arguably the most brutal way that he could be at the time. But God sent Jesus to be an example as much as he sent him to free us from our sin. God sent him so that we have an example in the Bible to look at and say, well, how did Jesus handle these situations? How did he go about these situations, and how can we face these situations in the same way? And just as the final line of this verse says, he says, "Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Isn't that incredible? He's facing death. He's staring death in the eyes. And yet he's saying, if this is something that you will, then let it be. How do you even do that? How do you will yourself to do that? Because I haven't stared death in the eyes. And yet, so many times, I've tried to fix things on my own because I want it to go by my plan. But no, we see here we've got to say, not as I will, but as you will. So we're going to talk a little bit about some things that you can do if you find yourself in any of these situations, if you're facing depression or anything like it. One thing that is very important to note is that other mental health issues can significantly affect depression. If you find yourself with more serious health issues like ADHD or even stuff like anxiety, that can affect your depression. So if you're feeling stuff like that, I'm sure we'll be covering some more of those topics in the coming weeks. So make sure you stay tuned in for those. The number one most important thing to do if you're feeling depression in any sense is to talk to someone. It doesn't even really matter who you talk to. It's better to talk to someone who might have been through what you've been through, but realistically, even just opening up about a situation can change your situation. As I was saying, for me, I didn't do this. It wasn't until very, very late on in my secondary school career when I moved to another church and I started to open up about this stuff that I actually started to see some change happen in my life. But prior to that, it was all internal. It was all in me. Didn't let any of it out, so it bottles. It gets worse and worse. Opening up allows you to relieve some of that pressure. Take some of that pressure off, put it onto someone else so that they can help you with it. You know, we as youth leaders, we are happy to be that port of call for you. We are happy to be the person for you to come and talk to. But if you're not comfortable doing that, that's cool. Just talk to someone. Find a friend, find a family member, anyone that you're comfortable to speak to, go and talk to them. The next thing is that there are, when you're talking about health, there are three main points that we want to focus on when we're talking about health. The three of these are our physical health, our mental health, and our spiritual health. One cannot be without the other. We believe that the different types of health that we're talking about here directly affect the other. If you're poor in your physical health, it's going to affect your mental health, and vice versa. Same comes for spiritual. If you're not solid in your faith, if you're not solid in your spiritual health, that can affect both your physical and your mental health. So we need to make sure that we're focusing on all three of these points before we even think about improving. So one of the big things for lockdown, big things for quarantine and COVID and everything that's happened, especially for me, is that my physical health went downhill. My physical health went downhill because I stopped exercising. I stopped doing tennis and badminton and cycling, all that kind of stuff. I started eating fast food a lot. I didn't really eat that much fruit and veg. Just a lot of the stuff that keeps you physically healthy I wasn't doing. And so, especially near the beginning of lockdown, I found myself getting very tired. I found myself getting very fatigued, primarily because I wasn't keeping myself physically healthy. Because of that, however, the knock-on effect affected my mental health. I felt a lack of drive, a lack of motivation. The things that I was doing, I stopped doing, primarily because I was too tired to do those things. So number one, if you're finding yourself in a depressive state, if you're finding yourself with a lack of motivation, are you keeping physically healthy? Are you practically keeping yourself in a position where you are actually physically capable to enact the things that you want to enact? Number two, with the mental health. Are you doing things that keep you mentally healthy? Now, this looks different for every person. It can be gaming for one person, it can be reading for another. There are activities that fill your mental drive and activities that dissipate your mental drive. You need to find those things in your life that fill you up and give yourself space and time to do those things. As I say, I don't know what that looks like for you. And if you don't know what it looks like, again, speak to someone, find out what they feel, find out what other people feel, and you might get a little bit more of an idea of what that looks like for you. And finally, our spiritual health. Keeping connected with God, keeping connected with the Word, keeping connected with our relationships. We're not designed to do this life alone, and that isn't just a mental thing, that is a spiritual thing. We're designed to connect with people, both one-on-one and in community. That's difficult to do in this time when we're all online, but there's still ways to do it. So do what works for you. If that's reading the verse of the day every day, or just finding Bible verses that work for you, go and find those spaces and allow yourself to be filled in that sense. That kind of brings my whole arcing message to a close, really. But I want to encourage you that if you're in these states, this isn't forever. And this doesn't define who you are. Depression can so easily make you feel like that's all that you are, but you're not. You're worth so much to so many people, and we want you guys to see that. So if you feel like you're in this state, come and speak to one of the team, go and speak to one of your friends, and we'll work through these things together. So we're just going to close in a prayer, and then we'll finish there. Yeah, God, I just thank you that you are so good. I thank you that you care about every aspect of our life, not just our relationship with you, Father, but you care about our well-being. You care about our health. And so, Father, I pray that you help highlight those times, those points in our lives that may need a little bit of help, may need a little bit of pushing forwards. And Father, I pray that you help us to do those things. I thank you that we're not stuck in our positions, not stuck in our situations, but you want to take us out and go above and beyond. And I thank you that you love us through every single scenario that we find ourselves in. You are so good, and we just pray for such a goodness, such a mercy over the next few weeks. Thank you so much for who you are. Amen.